Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. So, still thinking about the subject of work, I want to say a word or two about retirement. Now, this is a topic which probably needs a whole series of devotions or extended amount of teaching just in itself, but I think it's helpful and at least possible to make a start on thinking about the issues associated with retirement just in connection with what we've already said about work. And in particular, just to contrast some of the biblical considerations that probably ought to shape our thinking on this subject with the widespread assumptions that are made increasingly in our culture over the last few decades about what retirement is. Let's just start by thinking about the slightly caricatured but sadly quite widely held view of what retirement is in the culture around us. What happens, in effect, in that mindset is that you get to a certain age, somewhere between 55 and 65 or so, and you switch off your career and switch on a whole pile of entertainment and leisure activities. The thought is that by then you've accumulated enough money in savings and investments so you can stop working to earn money and then you can just spend all the stuff you've earned in the remaining years of your life. Worst case scenario, the idea of retirement devolves into a kind of unproductive, idle, self-indulgent period of life, which is everybody's aspiration at the end of their lives, and actually shapes the whole of people's working lives in a really destructive and self-absorbed way, so that what people really, really want to do with their lives is get to the 20 or 30 years of extended me time in their retirement. Now, put like that, it's really easy to see the obvious problems with that outlook. Obviously, it's great to have a break. Obviously, it's wonderful to be able to spend a bit more time on leisure activities and so on, spend time with grandchildren, spend time relaxing and so on. But we need to have a more constructive and positive picture of retirement, or at least of the later years of our lives in the world, fulfilling the vocations that God has given us. And so let me make just some comments about that period of our lives in general, which may serve to prompt further thoughts and further discussion. And of course, if you've got any comments, please don't hesitate to fire them my way. First up, let's make some obvious assumptions, make some obvious comments about the assumptions that picture of retirement makes. It makes some assumptions about our financial situation. There may be a small proportion of people who can afford to retire in that sense, but there will be many who can't, simply because they have not managed to save enough money, or because they have children or other commitments. And built in here is something of a demographic shift, whereby on average people are living a little bit longer, and the balance between people's income during their lives, the amount they've been able to save in investments, stock market returns, and their expenditure during the later years of their lives have shifted so that it's no longer possible to make the kinds of assumptions that people were making even just 20 or 10 years ago, certainly not 30 or 40 years ago. One way of looking at this situation we've got ourselves into is that the idea of retirement developed in the mid-20th century, beginning with a wise and to a certain extent godly desire to provide for oneself after it became more difficult to work for money. That good desire then devolved into a more self-indulgent desire as various economic factors meant that people became more prosperous in the later half of the 20th century, so that instead of people wisely and in a godly way saving to provide for themselves, that turned into a self-indulgent desire just to save, to relax and chill out and spend time on entertainment and leisure pursuits. It went from godly provision to ungodly self-indulgence. That seems to have been something of a shift, and maybe demographic realities and financial realities are forcing us back away from that. So retirement in that sense probably won't be an option for an increasingly large sector of the population, and it's helpful just to bear that in mind as we're thinking about it. Second thing to highlight about that picture of retirement, or about retirement in general, is that it does highlight some helpful points about health and physical well-being. The truth is, all of us are probably going to have a little bit less energy, somewhat diminished capacity for whatever kind of work we're doing when we get to our 60s, 70s, 80s than we would have had in our 30s, 40s and 50s. And so there is something wise about making plans to accommodate that change in our natural capacities. To put it in the context of the Genesis 1 picture that we're trying to frame our conversations about work within, one way of saying this is that we just have less energy to carry on filling and subduing the earth in those later years or decades of our lives, and it's wise to make plans to accommodate that. In that sense, some form of retirement planning is obviously a good idea. Just one third comment about that picture of retirement we started with earlier. My fear is that it makes the mistaken assumption that work is purely a burden. And this is really one of the more serious theological problems with that picture of retirement. This is the frustrating thing that I just want to stop doing. And of course, we've seen something of the roots of that frustration from a theological perspective. Work has the capacity to be frustrating. Very frequently it is. And yet, we don't want to entirely concede to that view of working lives in the sense of our careers. We want to recognise that actually, for all its frustrations, a job or a career can be, and in one sense should be, as much as we can make it, a valuable part of our vocations as creatures made in the image of God. We don't want to embrace, in other words, the idea that the whole of our life is about getting to the point where we can stop work in that diminished sense. That's the unhelpful picture, because it relinquishes the biblical sense, Genesis 1, that work is a good thing. Our vocations are a good thing, and our jobs or our careers are a part of that. So, how could we try to have a more positive biblical approach to the idea of retirement? Let me briefly suggest a question that we could ask. Instead of thinking about retirement as, when can I stop my career? Let me try and pose a question for you that we could ask, which might be a more helpful way forward. How about asking this? How will my capacities, responsibilities, and opportunities to serve Christ and his church and the world change as I get older? How my capacities and responsibilities and opportunities change and develop as I get older? Obviously, we don't know any of the details of that. All kinds of unforeseen things happen. But if we think about capacities, responsibilities, and opportunities in that positive way, we can make some brief comments about them. Our capacities will diminish eventually. And so obviously some kind of provision, including, to the extent that we're able to, financial provision, is a good idea. We don't want to assume that we'll always be able to work at the capacity we currently do in order to provide for ourselves. Responsibilities, though, well, different people will be in different situations, and it's just worth asking yourself, in the particular situation you're in, what will your responsibilities be? For example, what will your family be like in 10 years, 20 years' time? What will your family be like when you're in your 60s or in your 70s? What responsibilities will you have for children who may have grown up, or for grandchildren, or for your extended family? Would it be possible for you to take on new responsibilities? Let's not make the assumption that just because our existing responsibilities may have changed so that, for example, our children become more independent, that we don't have any other responsibilities. What could we take on that's new? And of course, that leads to the third aspect of this question, opportunities. With increasing age, all else being equal, comes increasing wisdom, increasing experience. We'd have to hope and pray increasing godliness and maturity. And one of the great things I'd want to encourage people to do, instead of thinking, when can I stop this wretched job so I can chill out and play golf every day? Rather thinking, how can I strive to grow in maturity and godliness and wisdom so that by the time I'm 55, 60, 65, 70, I'm more wise, more helpful, more productive, more able to serve other people. I have more opportunities in a huge variety of fields. So that perhaps if we didn't have to work to provide financially for ourselves to quite the same degree, we'd be able to take up those new opportunities with unpaid work, maybe with new paid work, maybe with mentoring people, maybe with helping young men start businesses or younger women with their children and their families, maybe in all kinds of other forms of charitable service and church service. In other words, let's try to see, to the extent that it may be possible in God's providence, let's try to see those years as a new set of opportunities opening up before us, and work and strive towards being the kind of men, the kind of women who are wise, godly, mature, and responsible enough to take those opportunities when, in God's providence, they may come our way. Just a brief sketch of some thoughts, at least, that may be helpful in prompting some conversation about the subject of retirement. The Lord bless you, and I hope very much to see you soon. Bye for now.